Music theory with Microsoft Excel. Auto-transposable music system through all 12 collections of 7 notes. Each collection of notes being automatically rotatable to each of the 7 modal perspectives, changing the tonic upon rotation. Part number 8. So get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin', and you need Microsoft Excel for that. Don't listen to other people that tell you otherwise. I'll tell you the truth. I'm telling you how it is. We are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that is okay because we basically build this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build the entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just follow along, possibly building the part of the workbook that we're currently working on. If you do have access to this workbook, though, 4 tabs down below, including a very colorful fretboard tab, we may refer to the example tab, in essence, the answer key, practice tab, having pre-formatted cells, so you could practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you do not have any of that, that is okay because we will continue to work in the blank tab where we started from scratch with a blank worksheet, continuing this time in essence in the blank part of the worksheet, practicing not only our music skills but our Excel formatting skills as well for formatting's sake. Quick recap of the objective and what we have done thus far. We want to be creating a system to jot down our musical information, our songs, our tunes, our melodies as efficiently as possible so that we can automatically transpose them, even if we're writing them just by hand, paper and pencil. Transpose them to all 12 collections of 7 notes without having to rewrite them, and possibly be able to rotate them to all 7 modal perspectives, changing the tonic as we do so. This is how I imagine and predict DAW systems will be in the future, in essence having 2 dials that we can shift everything that we write down within. That's how it should be, and that's how we're going to make it happen here. So we have the MIDI numbering system that we started with. This is kind of the computer numbering system that'll be behind the scenes that we'll use as we go forward. This is going to be the local numbering system for the 12 notes. This is how human beings should be using a numbering system because it is useful to have simple math, adding, subtraction, so on, and you know. And then we've got the Nashville number system. So we would like to be writing our information down from the perspective of a 7-note collection. Still being able to use all 12 notes, but from the perspective of a relative position. And that is the thing that allows us the dials that we can turn automatically, transposing all of the music that we write as possible and well as rotating it. We then have our chords written in multiple ways, remembering that sheet music often doesn't have chords. You just have to stack the notes, as is the case with a DAW system. But it would be nice, particularly for people that don't have musical understanding for stacking chords, to have at least the basic chords, all the chords that can be constructed from the 7 modal perspectives available. And these are those chords. We can write those as well, however, without note references, but rather references to relative positions. As we do that, then we can actually list out the chords, such as a Lydian chord, by Nashville number, meaning it's a 4-6-1, otherwise known as a modal point of a Lydian, Aeolian, and Ionian node. Now the problem with this, however, is that Ionian isn't giving me octave perspective. I would like to make sure it's an Ionian that's higher in pitch. For that, I can use an absolute modal numbering system or Nashville numbering system, meaning it's going to be a 4-6-8. The 8 representing that it's going to be higher in pitch. 8 minus 7 is 1, so it's still going to be an Ionian. All right, and then we have our collection of notes over here. These are the 12 collections of notes in our Western music, but we're going to label them not as scale degrees, but as relative positions. So now we have the relative positions, once again, that giving us the dial that allows us to rotate automatically between the collections of notes. We have the actual data input, which I would recommend as just sheet music, even if you're writing by paper and pencil, possibly eliminating normal chord construction needing notes, but instead use Nashville numbers both for the chords and for the notes, noting that that does not restrict you to 7 numbers, because you can use a 0.5 for the notes that are in what I call the ocean, outside of the collection. Why would you do that? Because then you can just say what collection of notes that you are using, and like the C major collection of notes, for example, say what the tonic is, like the Ionian being the tonic, and then you can write your music in such a way that it could automatically be transposable through all 12 collections of notes without you having to rewrite the notes. It's the most efficient way to do it. Now, note that if you want to do it the traditional way, then of course you could still write it this way, which I have to adjust these shortly. We'll do that in a second. But you can write it with reference to the note names. And then if you're using a DAW system or even just an AI software like a ChatGPT, will be able to transpose it to something without note names if you give it the proper information. That then allowing you to transpose it to all 12 collections of notes very easily. All right, and then once we have this middle section is what I would like to represent as where we're going to work, like the middle part of the piano. If we're working on C, like something in C major, then this middle column is going to start at C4 and go up to the end, to B4, right? But if we're playing in the key of D Dorian or something like that, or D major or something, I would like the lowest note to be D, and then go 12 octaves up from there. So that would mean that this middle bit should be whatever the middle point that we're starting on, the lowest note for the middle place that we're working on, which usually would be like middle C upwards, and that would be the idea. And then you could go up here. Basically, if you're going an octave higher than that, what does that allow us to do? It allows us to write chords here, which represent multiple notes, and it allows us to write our notes on one row instead of having to break out one octave into this whole column. Now, a DAW system should be able to go back and forth from writing in this format to showing it in this format, which is an absolute numbering system, and then breaking it out into like a DAW system that shows each note. So that would be expanding just this orange bit to this 12 row bit here. And so now I can see all of the numbers represented in absolute numbers on the right-hand side. So that's where we left off last time. So this is basically just proving the concept that we can do this. The DAW system has the capacity to do this. The fact that current DAW systems do not do this means that there's an opportunity for somebody out there, in my opinion, to put this into the system, or so that basically people can easily by ear have the two dials to rotate their music around. All right. So I'd also just like to say, well, I could copy this whole thing to the right and then say, let's convert this to show not these numbers, but possibly show the notes, or possibly show relative position, which would be the local Nashville numbers. Let's show that would be more user-friendly to a player of the guitar. This is the way the system might like to see it from a computer system, showing the absolute number. So let's just copy this whole thing. I'm going to copy from the skinny on over to here, copy that, and I'll paste that up top, paste, and we have the same format. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of the numbers. Now the numbers are not there anymore because the formulas are all out of whack. But I'm going to make this a little larger. Why doesn't it doesn't want to show that in A? What happened to that? That's weird. Let me check that out. This B is saying give me that X lookup. Is that 3 right there? So let's say that these are all going to be the same. Let's do this by going this equals this, and I'm going to just copy that formula to the right, so just have the same columns. I'm going to paste it formulas only, and I could paste that all the way down. So I'll just say these are just going to be dependent on the columns to the right. Just paste that all the way, formulas only. All right, so there we have it. So that should work. And then what I'm going to do is adjust this formula. So all the formulas don't work. So I'm going to take this whole formula bit, Control Shift down, and Control Shift down, and I'll just delete all of that. So now nothing's in there. So what do I want it to do? I want it to take the number that's over here, if there's anything in here, and possibly return to me, let's return the letter first. So this should be pretty easy to do. Let's see if we're going to say equals X lookup and then tab. And I want to say look up the related cell over here, which has that 60 in it, comma, and I want to look that up over here. I don't need a range. I'm just going to say look that up right there in that one cell, and then comma. If you see that, then give me the related C. So it's going to give me that. So it's going to see that 60, give me the related C, enter, there it is. Okay, great. Now the problem is, what if it doesn't see that in there? So if I double click on this again, if it doesn't see it, I'm going to put a comma at the end. If it's not found, I want you to just leave it blank, which is going to be double quotes, nothing between them, leaving it blank, enter, boom. All right, so now I need to copy this to the right and up to test it. So if I go in it, notice that this cell over here, I want it to move both up and to the right. So that one I leave alone. This one, however, is representing that 60. I want it to be able to move up, mixed reference, but not to the right. So I want to allow the number, but I don't want it to move to the right. So a $, mixed reference before the letters. This one also, I want to allow it to move up, but not to the right. So a $, before the letters, not the numbers, $, mixed reference, and then I can copy it to the right and say, does it work? It does, it looks like, because there's a blank. Let's copy it and paste it all the way across this thing and see if it works. So I'm going to paste it formulas only, right click, paste formulas only, and boom. So that looks, so now we've got like our DAW system that's showing us just letters, and I know which octave it's in because we're starting here in the middle bit, and then it's reaching up, so this C is in the next range of octaves. Okay, that's cool. Now I could do the same thing and then return the relative position, the Nashville number. That's the other way that you might want to see a DAW kind of system showing the Nashville number. So let's just copy it one more time. I'll copy the skinny on over here, and if I can do it that way, I can do it with anything in that column, you would think. So let's just do the same thing. I'll put it over here. I'll delete everything that's in there thus far. My columns should be good to go. So I'll delete this, and then I'll go in here and say I'll just do the same thing, but this time I'm going to say equals X lookup. I want you to find the related cell, which now has a C in it. I could do either one. I could go to the 60, but let's just go to this one. Find that C, comma. You want to find that C right here in that cell. If there's a C there too, then return to me, comma, the local distance. So I want the local, this is the local Nashville number. That's that one. And then enter. So that gives me a 1. Double click. Now, if it doesn't find that C, if there's nothing there, or it's not a C, then comma, what do we do if it's not found? Double quotes, leave it blank. And so we'll say enter, okay, and then double click on it. So now I'm gonna say this cell don't need to do anything. This cell, I don't want it to move to the right. So I need a $ before the letters, and that's a mixed reference. And this one also not moving to the right, $ before the letters. If I copy it to the right, should be nothing there. Let's copy it again and paste it all the way across, and it should do what we think. I think that should do it. So we'll paste it, formulas only, boom. So now we've got the Nashville numbers. So once again, the Nashville numbers, and I might need another cell here. So now I can see the decimal points, because the Nashville numbers can still show me, for example, a number that's in what I call the ocean or outside the 7-note collection with the 0.5 here. So I think non-music oriented people that didn't learn music as a child would actually learn this a lot better in a DAW system. This is the way the DAW system should be for those learners, because it's more efficient. Like for if you're going to write music in a DAW, this is a more efficient system. Okay, it just is. I know that's annoying to particularly piano players that say, no, you have to enter it with a piano keyboard. It's like, I love the piano. There's nothing wrong with the piano. I support piano and piano players, but it's not the most efficient way to enter into a computer. Okay, I'm sorry. So then the computer should be its own musical instrument. It's its own. Let's make this skinnier. It's not you might not have recognized that the computer doesn't look like a piano. I don't know if this has occurred to it has a keyboard that's different than the piano keyboard. Okay, anyways. All right, so the next thing that got out of whack here is that, remember that we used this format right here in our formula, and this is actually referring to, boom, this up here. So what we did is we labeled this column by putting the range up top. Why? Because then I don't have to show the range. I could just refer to that cell, and then I can refer to that cell over here, pulling that into my formula by just referring to this cell. So when I go into here, for example, this indirect is saying, look at that cell, but look at it, the content within it. That's why it says indirect, which is actually the range. So it's reading it as the range right there. And that allows me then to change the range with this 4. I can change it. If I make it a 6, this is the range related to the collection of notes, or it should be, for D. Now the problem is that this is messed up now. Why did that happen? Because if I go up here, the problem with doing that is that this isn't a formula, it's hard-coded. So I kind of feel like I should be able to say it equals itself, like it equals itself, you know? And then, but I can't do that, so I have to hard code it. And that means that when I add anything, if I add columns over here, the range didn't change automatically. See, AH no longer represents this range, because now it's AP. So I have to go through here and change all of this to AP, AQ, and A whatever. So that's not the best way. That maybe there's a more efficient way to do this, but this is the way I figured out to do it, and so it is what it is. That's all I can. That's all I could think of. So I'm just gonna go through here and change this to AQ, AQ, and AQ tab. F2, gonna change this to AR, that's the pirate column, R, and then F2 to get in there, and change this to AS, and AS, tab, F2 to get in there, change this to AT, the at column, AT, tab, F2 to get in there, and change this to AU, AU column, tab, F2 to get in there, change this to AV column, the AV column, tab, F2 to get in there, change this to AW, that's the AW, AW is AW, A2, this is going to be AX, and AX, tab, F2 to get in there, AY, AY, I'll tell you why. And then the next one is going to be AZ, not as F2, and this is going to be BA. Ending off with BA, baby. That's right. Okay. So that means if I go down here, now this should be populated properly, right? So now these are referring to the proper column. If I bring this back to a C, that refers to the proper column, which our format looks like it's doing what it should do now. Okay, so that's cool. All right, so now the next thing we want to do is like, okay, so I have this mapped out. This is how I would like to write my sheet music, and then be able to transpose it to normal construction or going from this normal notation up to here. And then I should be able to go back and forth from this to the DAW. So we've kind of proved that concept. I should also, if this was in a database program, be able to stack in a DAW format and then compact it. Let that format compact. It should be compactable over here. I believe if you can go one way, proof of concept, it should be able to go the other way. And so I won't do that. I'm going one direction in the Excel format. But the next thing we want to do is to be able to now this, by the way, if I change this to a 6, now everything's from the perspective of the D. So I'm imagining then when I do that, what does that happen up here when we look at the lowest note? This orange spot should be then D, or middle D should be the lowest D, or D4 from the piano notation, and then it's going to be 12 up from there is the orange bit. So if I look at that on the DAW, how can we transpose that onto like the normal DAW system? Well, now notice this is now D, so I'm starting down here on the D, which I would have to say is now D4. So notice that I'm not starting on C4, I'm starting on D4 and then moving up from there. So our actual column over here is changing as I change that number, right? And so that's going to be. Now I do have a problem with this absolute numbering system because that 60 represents C4. So this column right here is the absolute column that should still correspond to the absolute C being 60. So how can I do that? Like so this column is changing as the perspective changes. This is now changing as well because this is the relative position. So now the natural number is showing the Ionian. The Ionian node is now a D instead of a C. So that's what we're starting, and then we apply the formula whole, half, whole, half. This, however, should be an absolute number, and it shouldn't change. The D should still be the D. This C should still be a 60. So how can I do that? Key here is the 60 for this column, because if I go up from that 60, we're just going to say it's that 60 plus 1, and if I go down from there, we said it was that 60 minus 1. The problem is that 60 needs to be changing as we go through all 12 collections of our 7 notes. So where does that come from? If I trace this, it's going all the way back to our MIDI system. So here's our MIDI numbering system. And we just pulled the middle of like the piano, which would be middle C or C4, which happens to have a number of 60. So all we need to do is say, hey, look, this is going to be the middle of the piano going from 60 up to 71. That's going to represent that C to the B within 1 octave. So we just need to say, hey, look, find this set of letters and then give me the related number that's in the middle of, in essence, the piano for the numbering system, and then everything else should be built properly. So let's go back on over and say, okay, what does that look like? We're just going to change this and say this is going to be equal to x lookup, and we want you to find this D. Whoop, wait a second. I want you to find this D, which is right there. You can't see it because it's covered, but that D, oh man, what happened? Now it got messed up. Do this again. This is going to be x lookup. Now I've got a capital x lookup, and then right there's that one, comma. We want you to find that, and we're going to go to the left, all the way to the left. Now I don't want the entire column because I just want the bit that is in the middle section, because that's going to be our starting point. So these letters right here, they repeat up and below it, but I just want that middle C section. So look in there, comma, and then return to me the numbering system from 60 to 71. So if I go to a D, it should give me a 62, and then we can count up and back from there. So I say enter, and then boom, and that should properly populate everything, because now I'm starting on a D, which from an absolute numbering system is going to be 62, and then the C is still the middle C. So I think that works. So that looks good. Does that mess anything up over here? I think everything is populating properly. Okay. So let's go back on over and then say, that means that I can easily go through my 12 collections of notes by just changing this key right there. So if I go to an 11 Now I'm on a G. So here's the G, which starts at 67. C is still 60 down here. That 67 then converts to a G, and then we have the same pattern, but now everything's been interpreted from the standpoint of the G now. It's the collection of notes around the G. All right. Now the next thing we want to do is say, well, I would like to be able to spin this to or rotate it around the 7 modal perspectives. Now note that that's a little bit different, because one way you might think about that is to say, well, look, if I wrote this song from the perspective of the major scale or the Ionian mode, then I could look at it from the perspective of like the Dorian, but it's not going to change anything, right? It's going to be the same. The song's going to be the same. I'm just looking at it from the perspective of the related Dorian. So if it was a C major to a D Dorian, it has the same notes in it. And you could imagine that, well, you could shift it to have the D the lowest note, but that would be just like as though you just shifted to a D major, right? It doesn't do. So that's one way you can look at it. But the other way you can do it is say, well, I'd like to rotate it to the Dorian so that the Dorian is now the tonic. So that means that if I say the song is in an Ionian node, when I rotate it to the Dorian, then it should change the Ionian chord up to a Dorian chord. And it should change the Dorian chord. If there's a Dorian chord, it should change it up 1. Nashville number 2 is a Dorian. Nashville number 3, it should change it to a Phrygian chord. So I can rotate the chords should change. Now the problem with that is it's not the relative positions, like an Ionian chord and a Dorian chord are different, right? The Ionian chord is a major chord, has a major third. A Dorian chord is a minor chord, has a minor third. So if I just rotate it everything uniform distance, then it's going to be out of key. There's going to be a lot of stuff out of key. So I would think that it would be nice if people are listening to it by ear, that you rotate it to the chord that's going to be in key. So if it's an Ionian chord, I'm going to rotate it to a 3-note Dorian chord, which is going to snap the third into a Dorian position. So that's easy to do from a chord perspective if we have our chart of chords over here, because I can just go, okay, I'm just going to rotate this around the modal perspective and just go, if it's a 3-note Ionian, then I'm just going to say, okay, if I rotate that, then that's going to be a 3-note Dorian, right? And I can just rotate that around, and that will then give me the perspective of a modal perspective, because we're pulling from this table of a 2, 4, 6, which represents a Dorian, a 4 is a Lydian, and a 6 is an Aeolian. So we can actually change the chords almost easier than the actual notes. And then there's the problem of the notes. Well, what if I have like a note which is an Ionian note? The question is, how do I rotate that? Because we're looking at a 7-note collection. We're looking at all 12 notes, but from a 7-note perspective. So if I rotate them all like 2 notes up, then some of them are going to be out of key that were in key before. So my thought on that would be, well, the actual notes that we're looking at, we rotate them up the standard distance. But if it was in key, then I want to remain wherever the destination is. I want to remain in key. So if I rotate it up 2 notes and it's out of key, I want you to push it up to something that's in key. But you also might have a scenario where you have a note that's out of key in your song. 1.5 note is out of key. It's in the Ionian Ocean, from my terminology, right? So that means when I rotate it up, 2 half steps, for example, then it might be in key or out of key. We don't really know because it just depends on where we're at. So from that perspective, I would say if it lands in key, great. I'm not going to fix it and push it out of key. But if it lands out of key, I'm also cool with it because it was out of key when we started with it. So that's going to be the rule that I think would be nice, so that we can rotate around the modes. I should be able to rotate around the modes. Now the other problem here is that the Ionian is that would mean if it was a C Ionian, that's the lowest note is going to be a C. If I rotate it to a Dorian, then it's kind of like what we did over here. We'd have to shift everything up. If it was a related Dorian, then everything's going to shift up to the D, right? We're going to have a D. The first note is going to be a D instead of right now it's at a G. So we also have to kind of take that into consideration. So when we rotate around from a modal perspective, it gets a little bit more messy than just simply transposing it. But I think it's still something that we could do pretty clearly, giving 2 dials to someone in a DAW who can listen to it by ear and then rotate it around in these two ways because we have a relative perspective. All right, so let's make this a 4 again, bringing it back to the C and say, okay, how could we do that? All right, so we can start off by just copying this whole bit. So I'm going to go over here and say, I want to copy this whole thing down. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to do this one at a time because I need to, there's a problem. I'm going to copy this one here. Wait a sec. Let's copy this. And then I want to bring it down past the DAW because I want to make another DAW for this one as well. So I'm going to put it like down here, right past the skinny. And then let's paste it. So that's that. Okay. And then the problem is that let's copy the next one underneath it and do the same thing. I'm just going to copy them one at a time. I'll copy this one, and then I'll bring it down here, and then paste that down here. Boom. And then the last one, the reason this was a problem is because this one hung under here, and I want to pick. Do I need this bit over here? Let's go ahead and grab it just in case. So I'm going to grab that bit and go down here to the end of that, copy that, and then this is going to be over here. And how far out do I need to go? Just one more. So I'm going to paste that right there. So then it pastes so that formats like that. All right, so this is going to be the Dorian. So I'm going to call this the Dorian. And I also want to put the Dorian over here at the end so I can see it when I go to my DAW. So I'm going to say Dorian on both sides. I want to do that up here too. So the Ionian I have up top, I want to show the Ionian on both sides so that when I go to my DAW over here, I can still see that it's connected to the Ionian. So I'm going to say this is going to be the Ionian and the Ionian. And this is going to be the Ionian equals the Ionian. And then down here, we'll have the Dorian, and then I'll have a whole nother DAW system. So if I copy this whole bit from here over, we're going to do this whole thing for the Dorian so we can see it map out. So I'll copy this from here to here, copy, and then go and put that here. So that's why we skipped some columns so we can see this kind of side by side. So I'm going to format this in a second, but that's going to be the idea. That's the mapping out of it. So if I want, so the key up top, this key right here, should be able to transpose it to any of the 12 collections of 7 notes. And then as we are on the Ionian, we want to then also be able to rotate it, which all of the modes will show up down below it, starting with the Dorian, and then we'll go in order to the Phrygian, the Lydian, the Mixolydian, and so on and so forth. So that'll be the format. Now, if you were in a DAW, then of course you would like to be able to write this in any of the modes, right? So if I wrote this in Dorian, then of course we should be able to go from the Dorian back to the Ionian. So you can go both ways, but I'm going to do it from the perspective of writing in the Ionian, moving forwards. But I think the proof of concept would be if you can go from the Ionian to the Dorian, you should also be able to write in Dorian and go from the Dorian all the way through to the Locrian, back to the Ionian, or back from the Dorian to the Ionian. They're all connected. It's all the same thing. Okay. So then if I go back down here, I'm in the Dorian. I'm going to delete this, what's in there right now. So let's delete this stuff and say, okay, delete that, and then delete that. And so that's our starting point. And then we basically, I just kind of want to start in the middle here and see how we can convert this. Let's actually pick that up next time, but let's just do a little bit more formatting over here. I'll say that this format should be the same as the one up top. So now I can just say, if I have this one correct, I could just say this equals the top bit down up here, and maybe just copy that across. So I can copy that this way. We might have to tweak it a little bit later, but let's do this for now like this, and paste the formulas. And then on this side, and then I'm going to, what's in there right now is, let's leave the formulas for now. And then on this side, this equals that. So that looks good. So we'll keep that for now. And we'll check that out next time. So now so now the formula that I'm going to be looking for is to say I'm on the Dorian. I want to look up here to the Ionian and say I need to convert this Ionian chord to a Dorian chord. We can possibly touch on that. How would that work? Well, here's the Ionian. I want to rotate it over here from the Ionian. I basically want to change that Ionian to a Dorian. So it's a 3-note Ionian. So if I write it in this format, the thing that's labeling the type of chord is the last letter. It's an Ionian versus a Lydian versus a 3-note Locrian versus a 3-note Mixolydian, 3-note Aeolian, 3-note, and so on. So one way I could try to do this is say, well, I can just look at, I could say that I want you to pull that same thing. Give me the first 2 letters the same, but the last letter, I want you to replace it with a D instead of an I. So we can think about this in pieces again, right? Because I have the same problem, whereas these are chords and these are notes. So let's say, okay, first I can break this out and say, well, if that's a chord, I would first like to say, could I make that into a Dorian chord? And then I'll look at these that are representing notes from a Nashville number and say, could I look at that Nashville number and come up with a system that will work? And that's going to be a problem here because of the snapping kind of issue that we have if something is in or out of the key as we do the rotation. So let's think about this side of the problem first and try to convert this. Like if I can see it as a chord and I write it in this format, so it's just a 3-note chord or a 4-note chord, then the defining factor is that last note. So I can start by saying, all right, well, I just want to pick the right side of it. I can say this is going to be equal to the right. Let's say this is going to be equal to the left. Let's say the left of this. So I want you to pick up and pick the left, comma, 2, and enter. So that gives us the N3, doesn't give us the I. So then when I get to the I bit, then I can easily do that by saying this is going to be equal to the right tab of that thing, comma, and then 1. And that will give us the I. Now, obviously, I don't want it to be an I. I want to shift it to the next one down, which is going to be a D. So because this isn't a number, one way you might think is like I could say the I is equivalent to a 1, and then I could add a 2 to it because the 2 should be the Dorian. So if that was a number, it would actually be a little bit easier, right? I could convert this like to a number. Instead of representing an I could call it an N3-3 chord because an N3-1 chord because the 1 would be something I can then change to a 2, which would give me the N3-2 chord, right? But if it's an I, then one way I could do it is I could say, well, look, I want you to find in our list of modes 1 through 7 Nashville number and just stagger it. So if it's an I want you to go to the one below the I, right? And then I have these repeated in a circle so you can just keep on going to the one below it. So if we do that, then that's one way we should be able to do it. So let's say if I was to try to figure that out, I can say, do this one thing at a time and then see if we can combine them together. So the next thing I could do is find that I in our modal points and see if I can return the I. And if I can, then I can offset it to return the one below the I, which will be the D for the Dorian. So one thing at a time. Equals X lookup, find that I, comma, where do you want us to find it? I want you to find it in our nodal points, which are here. I'm going to go all the way down, so there's only 7 of them, but they keep on repeating, so that if I start on like a Locrian, the next one will repeat to an Ionian. And then comma, what do you want us to return? The same thing. Well, that's just going to return another I. That's true, that's what we want, but I'm going to say, okay, that gives me an I, but now I can basically offset that. So I want to take that and basically offset it. So I'm going to go back into it and say, we're going to put in front of it then the, what do we call it? An offset tab. And then that whole thing, which gives me an I, I'm going to go to the end of that and say, comma, offset by rows. How many rows do we want to offset by? 1. Go to the next one down, which should be a D. And then we put that together, and what happened? Que paso? Oh, I also need to hit a comma and put a 0 for the columns. So then enter. And so there it gives us a D. So that's great. So now I just need to put this end bit up top on this bit up top. So this was the right side, so that I need to put over here. So this is going to be the right, and then I want to convert that to a D. So first what I need to do is get to this I needs to be within this cell before I can copy it and combine it to this one. So that I want to not refer to the I want to put the formula in there that was the I. So if I go into here, it's going to be right. That's what gives me the I. So I'm going to copy that. And then in here, when I refer to that cell, it's right there. Instead of referring to that cell, I'm going to replace it with this formula, which gives me an I. So now it's all in one formula. So I'm going to say enter. So now that whole thing gives me the D. I don't need this anymore. So now I have this side, which gives me the N3, and this side gives me a D. So if I go into this and I copy this whole bit, copy that, enter, and I go into this, then at the end of it, I'm just going to say and, which is going to tie the two text strings together, paste that whole thing, which gives me the D, and then enter. So now we've got our formula that allows us to give us the formula. So let's go back in here again and say, do I need to do any absolute references and all that kind of thing? So this is representing the BD up top, so that's fine. I want to be able to copy that to the right and down. So I think that's fine, but these ranges need to be F4, 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 and F4, and then enter, and let's copy it to the right and see if it does what we would expect it to do. It does to here, and then it falls apart over here. Why? Because this is pointing to a relative position, meaning like a note as opposed to a chord. So it does what we expect. We got the 1/2 to look correct, right? This one, we're drawing from something that was a 3-note Ionian. Now it's a 3-note Dorian. This was a note 4, a 4-note Dorian. Now it's a 4-note Phrygian. This was a Phrygian. Now it's a Lydian, right? This was a Lydian. Now it's a Mixolydian. So it looks like that is doing what we want it to do. The next step is for us to figure this half out. How could I do a formula that will properly adjust the actual notes that are represented in relative position, which we end up with a snapping kind of issue, right? Because you would think that normally it would be like a whole step up, possibly, to get to the next step up, but sometimes that's going to land you in the ocean. So we'll talk more about that basically next time. What's the best way to deal with these notes, and then combine those two together so that if it's a chord, it'll do this, and if it's a note, it'll do what we do for that. All right, so that's what we'll continue on next time.